Week 4, the Cleveland Browns will be traveling to Vegas to take on the Raiders. As always with my game previews, we'll be going over the depth charts and matchups to watch for on both sides of the ball. Also at the end of these previews, we talk a little bit about coaching and scheme, so make sure you stick around for that. I do these previews every week, so if you have any suggestions or anything that you'd like to see added to this series, please let me know in the comments. If you've been watching my content, please consider subscribing to the channel, and as always, enjoy the video. For anyone that's new, I'll explain my key for grading these players. Players can be anywhere from a 0 to a 100 on the grading scale. Over on the left you can see that scale. The first category is elite. This is the top players in the league. You can think of this as a 90 to a 100 on the rating scale. Next is star players. These players aren't quite elite, maybe not top 5 at the position, but still huge difference makers. These players will be an 80 to an 89 on that scale. Next we have solid players in green. These are players that aren't necessarily stars, but players that are good enough that the team most likely considers this position as solid, and one they're not looking to replace. This would be a 70 to a 79 on the rating scale. Then we have average players. This one's pretty self-explanatory. These are players that are league average for the position. GMs probably consider this position as not as a top need, but one they would upgrade from if given the chance. These players would be a 60 to a 69 on the grading scale. Last we have poor players. These players have a recent history of performing poorly and will probably be replaced in the offseason if they don't pick up their play. These players would be below a 60 on that scale. I grade these players on how I see them now, and these grades change throughout the season. For example, I've downgraded some of the Raiders' offensive linemen as they've been horrible running the football this year. I also downgraded Zamir White, who can't seem to hit a hole in his own scheme. These are just some examples. Any player on any team can move up or down based on how they play, so nothing's set in stone. Now with that out of the way, let's get into some of the matchups I'll be looking at in this game. The first thing I'm going to talk about isn't necessarily a matchup, but more just about Gardner Minshew in general. He missed some wide open throws last week and took some unnecessary sacks when he could have either just hit the open target in rhythm or threw the ball away. This has been an issue with Minshew his whole career and doesn't seem like something that's going to be coached out of him. At this point, it's just who he is as a player. Outside of about a quarter and a half against the Ravens, Minshew has looked like one of the worst quarterbacks in the league. His accuracy hasn't been horrible, but his indecisiveness and inability to get the football out of his hands has been one of the biggest issues with the Raiders' offense. It seems like every week at this point, but after another poor performance against the Panthers, we have to take a look at the Raiders' offensive line against a very talented Browns defensive line. The matchups aren't getting any easier, so the Raiders need to figure out their issues quick. Jackson Powers-Johnson looks solid in his debut. He isn't listed as a starter yet, so I'm not sure where they're planning on playing him. Last week he came in for Dylan Parham, who in my opinion has been the Raiders' best offensive lineman. Unless there was some kind of injury, this just seems like incompetence on part of the Raiders. DJ Glaze came in when Thayer Munford got hurt and put together a mixed bag of results, but ultimately wasn't bad for a rookie. On the flip side, Myles Garrett is one of the best edge players in the league, possibly the best. He's complemented by Zadarius Smith, and they have juice inside as well with Dalvin Tomlinson and Shelby Harris. This is one of the best defensive lines the Raiders have faced so far, and probably the weakest O-line that the Browns have faced. Overall, this matchup could absolutely wreck the game for the Raiders and win the game for the Browns. The Raiders are going to need to perform much better if they want any shot at winning this game. There are some good matchups on the outside in this game. Denzel Ward and Greg Newsome form one of the better cornerback duos in the NFL. The Browns will need a solid game plan to deal with Devontae Adams, who has shown this season that he's not slowing down. He has had some drop issues, which is concerning. Hopefully for Vegas he can get that cleaned up. Teams have been choosing to cover Brock Bowers with a nickel corner. That will be a bad matchup for the Browns as Martin Emerson Jr. did not look good last week. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Browns focus on doubling Bowers and trying to remove him from the game even more so than Adams. The Browns have the guys at the second level to really help with this, as Owusu Koramoah is a solid athletic linebacker who can give help covering Bowers if needed. I'm sure the Browns will try a mix of things and see what sticks in terms of covering these playmakers. Let's flip over to the Browns offense and the Raiders defense. Just like we talked about with Minshew, let's talk about another struggling quarterback in Deshaun Watson. Watson was once elite in his own right, but since returning from time off hasn't looked like the same quarterback at all. Kevin Stefanski has gotten a lot out of lesser quarterbacks running his play action off the wide zone, but for some reason has been calling a lot of straight dropbacks for Watson. Watson's accuracy and decision making has been poor this season, and like Minshew, he seems to be the cause of a lot of sacks as well. Whichever one of these quarterbacks can figure it out and play a little better could decide this game. I thought Amari Cooper looked solid last week, and the Raiders secondary really struggled in both coverage and tackling after the catch. Prior to this, the Raiders secondary has looked pretty solid. I would even say exceeding expectations by a lot. But last week, they let Deontay Johnson absolutely cook them. They seemed uninterested in even playing football, which is extremely disappointing to see from a team that had the opportunity to start 2-1. Other than Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy has looked better with the Browns this year. He had a solid game against the Jaguars, but he didn't do much last week against the Giants. He is a solid run after catch player, and so is Elijah Moore. If the Raiders secondary looks anything like it did last week, this game won't even be close. Let's talk a little bit about the trenches. The Browns have had some injuries up front, and I haven't seen an injury report yet, so keep me honest, Browns fans. I believe Joel Bitonio slid to left tackle last week when Willis got hurt. DeJuan Jones is playing right tackle for Jack Conklin while he's injured, and he hasn't looked good whatsoever. I believe Wyatt Teller will also be out this week, so we'll have to see what the Browns do and how they decide to shuffle that offensive line. This line really struggled last week protecting Deshaun Watson, and this was before the injury to their left tackle. The Browns' offensive line has always been considered a strength of the team, but they've really struggled this year. On the flip side, both Christian Wilkins and Maxx Crosby are playing through some injuries right now. Crosby did not look like himself last week at all, and it had me questioning if he should even have been in that game. He has a high ankle sprain, and if it's causing him to not be able to contribute, it may be best to let him rest for a week or two. Last week would have been a perfect game to let him sit, so I'm not sure what this coaching staff was thinking letting him play. The loss of Malcolm Kuntz for the season is looming large on this defensive line as they do not have any complementary pass rushers to Crosby. They also struggled stopping the run against the Panthers or generating any pressure without blitzing. Chuba Hubbard was running all over this defense, and Andy Dalton was airing it out with a clean pocket. This is a concern for a group that was supposed to be the strength of their team. Let's briefly touch on both teams' coaching and schemes. Antonio Pierce went 5-4 last season as the Raiders' interim coach and is off to a 1-2 start this year as an official head coach. He's made some shaky decisions with time management and fourth downs. He really needs to clean that up as the season goes on. Luke Getsy's play calling has been less than desirable, as you could probably imagine. He wants to be a wide zone play action team that uses motion and fakes to keep defenses on their toes, but this team has been unable to run the football, which has thrown a wrench in everything he wants to do. Patrick Graham is probably the best coach on the Raiders coaching staff. He runs a disguise-heavy zone scheme, but this year has really been a mix of a lot of man coverage and blitzing as well, running a mix of 3-4 and 4-3 fronts. He's had a mixed bag of results so far with this defense. Kevin Stefanski is in his 5th season as the Browns head coach and has a record of 37-30 heading into this year. He's had a lot of success in the run game as an offensive coach with the Browns, which is the staple of this wide zone Shanahan-Kubiak system that he's tried to implement here. The bigger problem has been his production in the pass game, which has been extremely up and down. His offensive coordinator is Ken Dorsey, who previously ran a modern pro spread scheme with the Buffalo Bills. It is Stefanski's offense, however, so I'm not really sure how much that matters or if they will try to implement any principles from that scheme to see if it would help Deshaun Watson. Jim Schwartz is one of the best defensive coordinators in the NFL in my opinion. He runs an attacking 4-3 style scheme with a lot of inverted cover 2 to try to bait quarterbacks into turnovers. Drop your predictions for this game down in the comments. This video seemed extremely negative, but that's the reality of where these teams are right now. I'd expect a low-scoring game, with the team that can win the turnover battle deciding the game. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like and subscribe for more. I'll see you in the next one.